They are among the darkest and most evil places to ever exist. One whose pits lay deep within the earth, the other constructed among 3 volcanic mountains. This pair of fortresses would house the most vile creatures of the early days, and be a place of misery and torment for those unfortunate enough to be brought there. Today on Nerd of the Rings, we cover Morgoth's fortresses of Utumno and Angband. In the utmost beginning of the world, just after the music of creation, the great powers would fight against one of their own kind who had fallen, Melkor. Determined to claim Arda for himself, Melkor wages this first war. All that the Valar sought to make in Arda, Melkor would seek to mar or unmake, as we are told in the Silmarillion. And they built lands, and Melkor destroyed them. Valleys they delved, and Melkor raised them up. Mountains they carved, and Melkor threw them down. Seas they hollowed, and Melkor spilled them. And naught might have peace or come to lasting growth. For as surely as the Valar began a labor, so would Melkor undo it or corrupt it. Ever after, the world would be tainted by Morgoth. For thousands upon thousands of years, the Valar and the children of Iluvatar that followed would live in an Arda that was marred. However, Morgoth would not go unchecked, for news of this war would reach the Ainur still dwelling with Eru beyond the circles of the world. After some 14,250 years of conflict, the mighty Tulkas, champion of the Valar, would descend into Arda, and Melkor fled before his wrath. 18,000 years later, after Tulkas' marriage to the Valanessa, he would sleep, being weary and content. It was then that Melkor would determine his time to bring further ruin to Middle-earth had finally come. He passes back over the walls of night and travels to the far north of the world. Now Melkor began the delving and building of a vast fortress, deep under earth, beneath dark mountains where the beams of Iluin were cold and dim. That stronghold was named Utumno, and though the Valar knew naught of it as yet, nonetheless the evil of Melkor and the blight of his hatred flowed out thence, and the spring of Arda was marred. Green things fell sick and rotted, and rivers were choked with weeds and slime, and fens were made, rank and poisonous, the breeding places of flies, and the forests grew dark and perilous, the haunts of fear. And beasts became monsters of horn and ivory, and dyed the earth with blood. It is from Utumno that Melkor would launch his renewed attacks upon the Valar, destroying the 2 lamps, the great sources of light for the world. This cataclysm would change the landscape of Arda, and the Valar would retreat to the far west, where they would establish the land of Valinor. There they would create 2 trees, a light source for their new land. Meanwhile, Middle-earth is plunged into darkness, and Melkor would work his corruption across the land. As the years of the trees come, we find that even more evil deeds would come from Utumno. There, Melkor built his strength, and he slept not, but watched and labored. And the evil things that he had perverted walked abroad, and the dark and slumbering woods were haunted by monsters and shapes of dread. And in Utumno he gathered his demons about him, those spirits who first adhered to him in the days of his splendor, and became most like him in his corruption. Their hearts were of fire, but they were cloaked in darkness, and terror went before them. They had whips of flame. Balrogs they were named in Middle-earth in later days. Utumno would also go by the name Udun, meaning dark pit, underworld, or hell. Knowing the Balrogs originally dwelt in this dark pit gives great meaning to Gandalf's words in The Lord of the Rings. calling Durin's bane Flame of Udun. Not only would the fallen Maiar of Shadow and Flame dwell in Utumno, but this fortress would also be where Melkor would take the first captured elves. There they would be twisted and tortured into the corrupted race of the orcs. Yet the evil of Melkor would not be contained by a single stronghold. West of Utumno, yet still within the Iron Mountains, Melkor made also a fortress and armory not far from the northwestern shores of the sea, to resist any assault that might come from Aman. That stronghold was commanded by Sauron, lieutenant of Melkor, and it was named Angband. Originally constructed as a secondary fortress and armory, the day would come when Angband would be his only stronghold. For in the year of the trees 1099, the Valar would make another great war against Melkor for the sake of the newly awakened elves. This battle of the powers sees the Valar unleash their might upon Utumno, breaking its gates and unroofing the fortress. Melkor takes refuge in the uttermost pit of Utumno, but Tulkas would wrestle with the Dark Lord, casting him upon his face and bounding him with the great chain Angainor, which Aule had wrought. Melkor is taken to the halls of Mandos, where he would be imprisoned for an age. Not only did the Valar destroy Utumno, but they also laid waste to Angband. Yet we are told that the Valar did not discover all the deepest, darkest secrets of these strongholds. Far beneath the ruined halls of Angband, in vaults to which the Valar in the haste of their assault had not descended, Balrogs lurked still, awaiting ever the return of their lord. After an age, the Valar would pardon a falsely repentant Melkor, allowing him to dwell in Valinor among themselves and the elves. 95 years of the trees later, Melkor would destroy the two trees, steal the Silmarils, and return to Middle-earth. And he, being freed, gathered again all his servants that he could find, and came to the ruins of Angband. There he delved anew his vast vaults and dungeons, and above their gates he reared the threefold peaks of Thangorodrim, and a great reek of dark smoke was ever wreathed about them. There countless became the hosts of his beasts and his demons, and the race of the orcs, bred long before, grew and multiplied in the bowels of the earth. Dark now fell the shadow on Beleriand, as is told hereafter. But in Angband, Morgoth forged for himself a great crown of iron, and he called himself King of the World. In token of this, he set the Silmarils in his crown. His hands were burned black by the touch of those hallowed jewels, and black they remained ever after. Nor was he ever free from the pain of the burning and the anger of the pain. Demonstrating his incredible power, this Dark Lord, formerly known as Melkor, causes the rising of the three mountain peaks of Thangorodrim, serving as great towers above his fortress. With Angband remade and its lord in power once again, his vile servants would return to serve him. This name, Angband, would translate from Sindarin to Iron Prison, or Hell of Iron. And indeed, throughout the coming centuries of the First Age, many an unfortunate soul would find themselves imprisoned in this dreadful place. One of the very first would be Feanor's son, Maithros. Deceived by a promise of the return of a Silmaril, Maithros is captured by Morgoth's forces. The Dark Lord hangs the son of Feanor by the wrist from the precipice of Thangorodrim. For over 30 years, Maithros would hang there above Angband. 3 years before Maithros is rescued by Fingon and the great eagle Thorondor, we would see another great but terrible work of Morgoth's fortress. After the creation of the sun and moon by the Valar to give light to all the world, the dread of the light was both new and strong upon Morgoth's orcs. The Dark Lord then works to resolve this issue. But Morgoth arose from thought, and seeing the division of his foes, he laughed. In the pits of Angband, he caused vast smokes and vapors to be made, and they came forth from the reeking tops of the Iron Mountains. And far off they could be seen in Mithrim, staining the bright airs in the first mornings of the world. A wind came out of the east and bore them over Hithlum, darkening the new sun, and they fell, and coiled about the fields and hollows, and lay upon the waters of Mithrim, drear and poisonous. These dark and poisonous vapors sent forth from Angband would no doubt inspire a similar tactic by the second Dark Lord in the Third Age. But some 55 years after the rescue of Maedhros, the elves of Beleriand would win a great victory over Morgoth. This glorious battle would result in a 400-year siege of Angband, and an unprecedented period of peace for Middle-earth. However, the peace would not last, for Morgoth would send forth great rivers of flame from Thangorodrim, which would pour all over the plain of Ardgallen, and the mountains of iron belched forth fires of many poisonous hues, and the fume of them stank upon the air, and was deadly. Thus Ardgallen perished, and fire devoured its grasses, and it became a burned and desolate waste, full of a choking dust, barren and lifeless. Thereafter the plain would be known as Anfauglith, the gasping dust. For the next 132 years, Angband would be a source of great evil that would plague the lands of Beleriand. Few would dare to approach the terrible fortress of Morgoth during this time. There are, however, some incredible examples of those who do. One is the High King Fingolfin, who after the Dagor Bragollach rides to the gates of Angband to challenge Morgoth to single combat. While Fingolfin would perish in the epic duel, Beren and Luthien would later succeed in sneaking into Angband in an effort to steal a Silmaril. In this tale, we get a sense for how terrible of a place this is. Then Beren and Luthien went through the gate and down the labyrinthine stairs, and together wrought the greatest deed that has been dared by elves or men. For they came to the seat of Morgoth in his nethermost hall, that was upheld by horror, lit by fire, and filled with weapons of death and torment. Beren and Luthien would indeed survive their mission into Angband, and by their efforts, a Silmaril would indeed escape Morgoth's grasp, though initially in the jaws of Carcharoth, the greatest werewolf to ever live. From Angband's depths would issue Balrogs, orcs, dragons, and werewolves. But also we would see some among the free peoples enslaved there. One of the most famous examples is Gwyndor, the elf of Nargothrond, who would be captured during the disastrous Nirnaeth Arnoediad, the Battle of Unnumbered Tears. He would then be among the prisoners of Morgoth to be enslaved, made to labor in the mines of the Iron Mountains. After he escapes 14 years later, the elf's strength and beauty are broken. He is but a shell of his former self. Also captured during the Nirnaeth was Hurin, father of Turin, who is imprisoned in a high chair upon the slopes of Thangorodrim. There he would sit for 28 years, forced to endure the curse Morgoth set upon his family. The number of Morgoth's slaves would grow as kingdom after kingdom falls over the years. Finally, in 545 of the First Age, the Valar would send their great host of the West, once again intervening against the Dark Lord. After 42 years of war, Morgoth's defeat would finally be at hand. Eärendil, in his great flying ship, alongside the great eagles, would fight the winged dragons. Eärendil would slay the greatest of their kind, and Calagon the Black, whose corpse would fall upon Thangorodrim, ruining the Three Peaks. Then the sun rose, and the host of the Valar prevailed. Nearly all the dragons are destroyed, and all the pits of Angband are broken and unroofed. The the might of the Valar descends into the deeps of the earth, where Morgoth had delved his mighty fortress. Having fled into his deepest mines, Morgoth sues for peace, but his feet are hewn from under him, and he is once again bound in the chain Angainor, and his great crown is beat into a collar for his neck. Finally, Morgoth, the dark tyrant of Beleriand, is defeated and cast through the door of night into the void. Thus an end was made of the power of Angband in the north, and the evil realm was brought to naught. And out of the deep prisons a multitude of slaves came forth beyond all hope into the light of day. And they looked upon a world that was changed. For so great was the fury of those adversaries that the northern regions of the western world were rent asunder, and the sea roared in through many chasms, and there was confusion and great noise, and rivers perished or found new paths. And the valleys were upheaved, and the hills trod down, and Sirion was no more. As a result of this cataclysmic war, the lands of Beleriand are destroyed and lost, falling into the depths of the sea, and with it are whatever might remain of the fortress of Angband. But what of Utumno? It certainly would survive in name, for the valley in northwest Mordor would be named for it, the Valley of Udun. But could the ruins of Utumno have survived the downfall of Beleriand? While we cannot say for certain, there is reason to believe they did. As far as Tolkien's own maps, we can see that he placed Utumno east of the Blue Mountains, the majority of which survived the destruction of Beleriand. As for the exact location of Utumno, we can't say for certain. In Karen Wynne Fonstad's incredible Atlas of Middle-earth, we see her location for the ruins of Utumno is, as expected, well oriented with Tolkien's own illustration. And if we were to compare this with her later Middle-earth map, we find the ruins of Utumno could line up with some very notable locations. One is the Ice Bay of Forochel, the place where the last king of Arthedain would die in the waters. And there may indeed be some hint from Tolkien's writings about this being the case. In the Lord of the Rings appendices, there is a footnote about the Losoth, the people that dwelt around this area. These are a strange, unfriendly people, remnant of the Forodwaith, men of far-off days, accustomed to the bitter colds of the realm of Morgoth. Indeed, those colds linger still in that region, though they lie hardly more than 100 leagues north of the Shire. Among the other possibilities in this area are somewhere in the northern waste, or perhaps most intriguing, the ruins of Utumno could be near the future fortress of Carn Dûm, stronghold of the Witch King's realm of Angmar. Whether Utumno lived on in a ruined state or at the bottom of the sea, it would be far from the most notable remnant of Morgoth. The vile evil of this first Dark Lord would live on in Sauron, his successor, and his own terrible fortresses of Dol Guldur and Barad-dûr, or the Witch King's own strongholds of Carn Dûm and later Minas Morgul. But also we would find remnants of those dark creatures that once dwelt in Morgoth's halls, with the orcs, the Balrog, dragons, and wolves who survived to trouble the free peoples long after the fall of Utumno and Angband. As always, I want to say a huge thank you to all my Patreon and YouTube supporters who make this channel possible. Tom DeBombadil 19, Lissamy the Cinda, Rabbi Rob Thomas, Charles Leisure, CCDC Red Team, Joe Tepper, The Mighty Mim, Andrew Carlisle, Swirled Traveler, Matthew Jeffrey, Viking Lord, Alvin Einbert, Jeremy Daniel Derby, Madame Director, Leo Vittori, Sky Carcass, Slide Belts, Dane Ragnarsson, Berto Berg, Graham Derricott, The Dark-Haired One, Wyland, Z and N, Evely, Micah Wu, and Debbie. If you enjoyed the artwork in this video, check out the artists in the description to purchase prints of their great work for yourself. Next time on Nerd of the Rings.